Okay. It's a great honor and a privilege to introduce our guest this evening, Dr. Michael Naor. And I'm just going to mention a short introduction about our guest speaker, our honored guest speaker. So Michael was born in Tel Aviv, and you did schooling there in Tel Aviv and your military service. You studied psychology at Bar-Ilan University, where you got a master's degree. And for the last 30 years, you've been living with your family in Düsseldorf in Germany, and you attended the University of Aachen, where you received your PhD. As a psychologist, psychotherapist, you worked, when you were in Israel, you worked in rehabilitation, and in Germany, you've been working for the past years in the psychiatric clinic. Since retirement about 3 years ago, and you look far too young to be retired, but you've been in private psychotherapy and coaching, but with a handful of patients and clients that you have. Most of the time, you're dedicated to continue your activities for the non-profit Jewish and pro-Israel organizations like B'nai Brit, Keren HaYesod, and the German Israel Society, and within the Jewish community in Düsseldorf. You are married to Yolanda, who's a physician and specialist in internal medicine, and her main field is in diabetes. And you have 2 sons, which I'm sure you're extremely proud of, Bo'i, who's a lawyer, and Alon, who's an investment analyst. And you are leading a traditional Jewish way of life in Düsseldorf. So without any further ado, it gives us great honor and privilege to introduce you, Michael. It's really such a pleasure and honor to have you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation, for the introduction, and it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure to be here, and I thank you for not only for the introduction but also for the invitation. For me, it's a new experience, and I'm curious to see what's going to happen. So, as I understood, I'm going to speak about well. About me, you said already whatever is to be said, and I would like to focus on my family, mainly my mother's family from Slovakia and from Hungary, but also, of course, on my father's family. So you mentioned I was born in Tel Aviv, and it was in the in the 50s, back in the 50s in Tel Aviv. And during my childhood, there was little I knew about the Shoah. Unlike some of my friends, I did not have any grandparents. I knew they were murdered by the Nazis, but this was more or less everything. My parents didn't talk about it, about that period. And I always knew and felt there was something terrible there, but I didn't ask. It was kind of an unspoken agreement. No questions asked, no answers given, more or less. When my father, Yitzhak Naor, former learner, when he was about 70 years old, he he decided to write his memoirs, so that I and my own family will know what happened. He typed his text on a typing machine, and then he brought the photocopied pages to a binding workshop. And this is how the improvised self-published book looked like. For that, I will need to share my screen with you. Just a second. Where is it? It's here. Well. I don't see my presentation now. This is Not so nice, but let's try again. I see my, can you see my screen?
Mary, is there anything you can do? We can see some.
I see something on your screen, Michael, but without any contents.
I don't understand, because usually it functions very well. Now this is, no,
Ah, there we go.
this.
So here we can see something. Yeah.
Michael, is that folder open?
Yes, it's down there, but when I click on it, there's nothing there. So
What is a PowerPoint?
yes,
Is a PowerPoint open?
I close it now because I think there's no sense. Just a minute. Should it be open or closed?
It should be open, ready to.
Should be open. Okay, it
Should
was
be open
open.
on the first page, I guess.
Oh, here we go. Ah, this is
Well, let's
See something there.
One second. Let's move into the center because we can hardly see you.
Can you see something?
Yes, sure. We can see the picture, sure.
Oh, good. Okay, okay. I was I was already in panic. Okay, so this is how the this first edition, so to speak, looked like. This is the first inner side. This was about 1990. In 1996, the book was translated into Czech by a friend and former mate at the forced labor camp. He also submitted the book to a competition about historical papers and issues, and it also received a prize then. About 2 years after my mother died, she died on the last day of 1999, my father consented, after 2 years, he consented to move to Düsseldorf in order to be closer to us. Here he lived in the Jewish home for the elderly. And there he met and befriended a former professor at the Düsseldorf University Clinic. And this professor, after reading his memoirs, insisted that they should be published. And he also connected him with a publishing house, and that's just a minute. This is the Czech version, and this is the book after being published in Germany, in German, of course, in 2003. My father died in 2005. By the way, about 2 hours ago, I lit a candle, a yahrzeit candle. Tomorrow is his yahrzeit, Bet, Adar Bet, which we have in this year only one Adar, but it's the same day. Now, relatives in Israel who do not speak German, among them Larry, but he was not that insistent, but others insisted and pushed me and motivated me to translate it into Hebrew. It took me quite many years because I only did it, you know, like now and again, but I was very happy and very glad that at the beginning of this year, the book appeared also in Israel in Hebrew, and Larry already started reading it, and he gave me a first comment that he found it very good. I hope it is. as I said, it is my father's book. I only translated it. Now I am mentioning that book because this book was something that raised my interest in and curiosity in family history in general, and particularly in the period of the Shoah.
Sorry, Michael, can I just ask you, has this book been also translated into English?
No, a question I was already asked, but I have nothing against it. If somebody is going to take it as a project, I don't think that I'm capable of doing that. And I can, to be honest, after translating from German into Hebrew, and I must say, I'm quite good in German, I'm quite good in Hebrew, but this is a German of the beginning of the 20th century, which is completely different than the German I'm hearing and speaking here in everyday life. So it was not so easy to translate, and translating into English is beyond my capacity. But maybe Larry has an interest.
Because there would be a
But
very
I
wide
think that
appeal.
Les would do a good job. Les, I think that you could translate it. That would really be good.
Michael, I'm sure there'd be an exceptionally wide appeal. People would be very interested and fascinated.
Les, we cannot see you. Move closer to the center.
I can see you, Les, but sometimes you're not very, it's not clear to hear you. Maybe you're, I don't know which mic you're using.
Okay, is this better? It should be a little bit better.
This is better, yes.
You know, it would be great value if you did translate it, or if it was translated into English, because there's a very wide appeal in the English world, especially now in the Shoah. And I think it would be tremendous value. It would be, there's tremendous value. So it's a project I think one should, wow, it would be very, very fascinating and very important, I think, if we could have it translated into. Okay, it's something to think about.
Yeah, something to think about, exactly. Maybe. Okay, so I would like to say something about my ancestors, and I would like to start with my father's family. They were living for several generations in Galicia, or Galicia in Hebrew. I hope this is how you say it in English, or you pronounce it in English, Galicia, which is in the southwest of Poland, and was since the end of the 18th century part of the Austrian monarchy. The name of the family was Glassman, and for instance, my great grandfather, Rabbi David Glassman, went later to then Palestine and became one of the Rosh, one of the heads of the Koilel Galicia, which was a yeshiva of the Galician Jews in Jerusalem. They were very poor back then. Now, to make something clear about the situation of the Jews then, they received, on one hand, they received a number of, they received rights. It was the Emperor Joseph II of Austria who gave the Jews a number of rights, like citizens' rights and so on and so on. But on the other hand, he had some rules that made the Jews not very happy and made their life also not very easy. I will not mention all of it because this would be a bit too much for this talk. But one of the points was that the Austrian authorities in this region back then allowed only the eldest son of a Jewish family to register his marriage officially. Of course, Jews married in chuppah v'kiddushin, a Jewish marriage, but of course they would go to the authorities to have, like today, also to have their marriage registered. So the authorities allowed this only to the eldest son of a family. Of course, Jewish families had 8, 10, 12 children, maybe even more. So all the other children had to look for another solution. Either they took another name or they went to another town where they were not known, and so on and so on. And so also in our family, in my father's family, my own grandfather, his name was Schrager Feivel, Schrager Feivel. When he married, he did not receive, he was not the oldest son, he was the youngest, as a matter of fact. So he could not register his marriage under the name Klagsbrunn, which was the name of his father's family. So he adopted his mother's name, Lerner, which is a different story. And until today, members of our larger family, like cousins and children of cousins and so on in Israel, are asking every now and then, how come you have a different name and so on? So it's not so easy to understand. You need to go back in history and understand the situation then. Anyway, this Schrager Feivel Lerner, in trade life, he was known also as Ferdinand Lerner. And he started already in a very young age. He was 18, according to my father's book. He was 18 when he started his own business of manufacturing cardboard and paper products. And during World War I, because of problems with transportation and service and so on, he moved with his family to the town of Ostrava, in German Ostrau, or Mährisch Ostrau, which means Moravian Ostrava, which was right on the other side of the border from the place where they were living in Poland. And there in Ostrava, he built a factory, a larger factory in the same field of cardboard and paper products. And this factory was also exporting products to many countries around the world, especially, of course, especially in Europe. Maybe I can show a photo of the family. This is, can you see also the mouse?
Yes, yes.
This is my grandfather, Schrager Feivel, Ferdinand, his wife, Frieda Frumet, and the 3 children. The older one was Leopold, Arie Leib. This is my father, Yitzhak, and this is the youngest son, Jakob. Actually, Jakob Shulem, but his name was Jakob. This photo was taken about 1923 in Ostrava. Now, let's go to my mother's family. My mother's maiden name was Grünsfeld, and she grew up in Bratislava, as I mentioned earlier. Bratislava in German was called Pressburg, in Hungarian Pozsony. I hope I pronounce it right. And here's a photo of her parents. This is Michael Zvi. My name, Michael, is after him, after my grandfather, Michael Zvi, also known as Hermann, and his wife, Elisabeth Erzsébet, in Hungarian, born Grünsfeld. Born Pfeffer. He was Grünsfeld, she was Pfeffer. Now, a few words about the Pfeffer side of the family. My mother's maternal grandfather was Rabbi Moshe Pfeffer, Moshe Mor Pfeffer. He was from Budapest. He was a rabbi and served as a rabbi and teacher at the Chevrat Shas organization, Shas Chevre, as it was called, located at the Orthodox synagogue in Budapest. He was married to Mirel Grünsfeld, originally from Bratislava. Here we see Mirel Grünsfeld left, with her mother, Johanna Grünsfeld, and her 3 children. This is Armin. This is my grandmother, Elizabeth, whom we've seen earlier, and this is the youngest child, Arpad. The woman in the back is apparently the maid, I suppose. The Pfeffer family, meaning Rabbi Moshe Pfeffer and his wife, lived at on the Kirali Utza in Budapest, which means something like King's Street. It was a very famous street in Budapest back then. And here's my mother, my mother, Judith, also known as Jutzi Grünsfeld, with her sister Eva, who died a few years later as a child, of pneumonia, I believe. And the photo shows both girls on the outer terrace, right in front, probably right in front of the apartment where Rabbi Moshe Pfeffer was living. Okay, now Rabbi Moshe Pfeffer survived the Shoah, hiding in one of the shelters for Jews that were provided by the Swiss embassy in Budapest. With him, survived with him were his son Armin, his own wife Dobby, and their son Larry. Both Pfeffer and Grünsfeld families were religious families. I suppose nowadays they probably would be referred to as modern Orthodox, as most of them were also professionally active in professions in trade, in craft, etc. They were, of course, familiar with Hebrew as the language of praying and learning, and the Hungarian and Slovak for dealing with the authorities and with the neighbors. But the daily spoken language in both families was German. Now let's get to Bratislava. First of all, maybe a few words about a brief history of the Jews in Bratislava. Jews came to the Slovak region probably together with the Romans. It was somewhere between the 2nd and 4th century. But a documented presence of Jews we have only as of the 12th century. In the 14th century, for instance, there were already about 800 Jews living in Bratislava. They had a permission to live in a restricted area in the center of the town. The town was fortified then, and they had a place. It was also called Judenplatz, like the Jews' square, something like that. The remains of a synagogue from that period can still be seen and visited in nowadays Bratislava. The majority of Jews engaged in commerce and money lending, and they had they've always been like elsewhere in Europe. There have been subject to restrictions and harassments. For instance, there were terrible blood libels, especially in the 15th and 16th century, and Jews all over the Slovak region were burnt at the stake. And after wars, and back then there were many wars, and after each war, the Jews were usually accused of cooperating with the enemy, and they were expelled from the major Slovak towns. After one of those expulsions, the Jews were, meaning that after one of those expulsions from the fortified town of Bratislava, the Count Palfi allowed the Jews in 1599 to settle in his grounds, on his grounds, next to his castle. His castle was out of town. This is the castle. I don't know exactly, maybe in the 60s, 70s, something like that. But we have an impression how it must have been looking like back then, in maybe 300 years ago. So the Jews settled there, a number of families, of course. There was not that much space for more. And until 1840, they were only allowed to settle in the Judengasse, Żydowska ulica. This is a photo from the beginning of the 20th century. In the end of the 19th century, the two large synagogues were built. There were a number of synagogues, but the large ones were built. The Orthodox synagogue, and this was serving the majority of the community, which was Orthodox, and the Neolog, which was the Reform synagogue. There were only about 60 families in the Jewish community of Bratislava who, towards the end of the 19th century, left the Jewish community and started this Reform community. They call themselves Austrittsgemeinde, which means in German, kind of exit community. They left the major community and established their own community. Anyway, another photo from older days. Here we can see Rabbi Akiva Sofer, the great grandson of the Khatam Sofer, greeting the Austrian Emperor Franz Josef and his wife during their visit to Bratislava in 1913. Now back to the Grinsfeld family. This was a bit of history. Now the Grinsfeld family. The first known Grinsfeld in my ancestry is Zalman Löb Halevi Grinsfeld. He came to Bratislava in about 1790 as a young man, probably in order to study in the yeshiva of Bratislava, which was established in 1700. Later he became a rabbi and married the daughter of Wolf Theben, a member of one of the oldest and most influential families among the Jews in Bratislava. As many of his ancestors, Wolf Theben was a mohel also, but he was, as many of his ancestors, a Stadlan, which means that he represented the interests of the Jews at the royal court in Vienna. The Theben family was very active in on the board of the community, as well as in Chevra Kadisha, and they were all Stadlanim. as I said. Years later, Rabbi Zalman Loeb Grünsfeld was one of two candidates to be appointed as rabbi of the Jewish community. The other candidate was Khatam Sofer. The story says that the number of votes was even for both candidates, and then the lot decided for Khatam Sofer. Rabbi Grünsfeld went then to the near town of Dunajska Streda, in Hungarian Dunaj Szerdahely, where he served as Av Beit Din until he died in, I think it was 1815, something like that. Here is his grave in Dunajska Streda. Now, my mother's paternal grandfather was Leopold Gottlieb, Jewish name Shlomo Aryeh, probably after Rabbi Zalman Loeb, Shlomo Aryeh, Grünsfeld. He served as the accountant of the Orthodox Jewish community. Here is shown with his family. Unfortunately, the photo is of bad quality. It is a copy of a photocopy, and a distant relative assigned numbers to each of the persons shown here, trying to ask other relatives who these persons are. In the middle, seated, we see Leopold Grünsfeld and his wife. His name was Nettie, and they had two daughters, one here, and 6 sons. The one standing on the right in the back is my grandfather, Michael Tzvi, whom we've seen earlier. The photo was probably being taken during World War I. We see some of the sons are in army uniform. Leopold Grünsfeld's father was Wilhelm Grünsfeld. In the cemetery book of the Jewish community of Bratislava, it is said about him that he was a sofer v'ne'eman b'kilateinu. Sofer means a person writing Torah scrolls and other holy books, and ne'eman b'kilateinu can be translated, he was trusted, or he was a trustee or something like that in our community, which could imply that he was managing financial issues for the Jewish community. Now we're approaching the period of the Shoah. My grandparents, both on my father's as well as on my mother's side, were murdered in the Shoah. This was also a fate of a large part of their families. Now, first of all, what was happening in Ostrava with my father's family? After German occupation of Bohemia and Moravia in 1938, my grandfather, Shraga Feivel Lerner, sent his oldest son, Leopold, with his wife and their little son, Ruben, to Palestine in order to find a new haven for the family and to establish the factory, their cardboard and paper production factory in Palestine. For that purpose, a number of machines and materials were being shipped to Palestine. Unfortunately, their grandparents didn't make it, and also my parents and my father's younger brother only made it to Palestine about 8 years later. So meanwhile, the Czech authorities deported all Polish citizens back to Poland. Those were mostly Jews who came to Ostrava during, or to the Czech region during World War I. My grandparents had to leave. They went to Krakow, where my grandfather's brother was living. And then there they were staying in a little apartment in Podgorze, which was the ghetto of Krakow. My father and his younger brother, Jakob, were supposed to go to Palestine with the Aliyah group organized by the Maccabi movement. Meanwhile, the house in Ostrava, where the family was living and the factory was set in, was occupied by Aryan Czechs. Usually these were members of the fascist party. So my father and his brother Jakob went to Prague in order to wait there for their immigration papers. On the second day of Rosh Hashanah, coming out of the Alt-Neuschul synagogue, they were arrested by the Gestapo. As part of the group of about 300 Jews, they were put into a prison in Prague. After several weeks, they were transported to the east by train, pressed in cattle wagons. The Germans planned to bring them to Nisko, which is in the east of Poland, where Jews were supposed to be resettled in no man's land between German and Russian lines. As the Russians prevented the train from reaching its destination, the Jews were taken to the town of Sosnowitz, where an improvised concentration camp was established on the site of an abandoned factory. Since most of the Jews in this group were Slovak from Slovakia, which was at the time still independent, the leadership of the Slovak Jewry was negotiating with the Gestapo their release for ransom. After a couple of months, these succeeded, and my father and his brother went to Krakow to see how their parents are doing. Situation in Krakow was getting worse every day, and so after a few weeks, my father and his brother seized the opportunity of crossing the border illegally to Slovakia, and eventually they arrived in Bratislava, where they managed to rent a room from a Jewish family. As it turned out, my mother was related to this family and visited them often. This is how my parents met and eventually got married in 1942. During all this time, my father and his brother were producing items of cardboard and paper in their small room. This way they earned their living. Their parents were murdered in 1942. They've probably been shot hiding in the town of Tarnów in Poland. Meanwhile, in Bratislava, under the protection of Nazi Germany, Slovakia proclaimed its independence in March 1939. The country came under the control of an extremely religious and right-wing party, the Hlinka party, which means in Slovak, the People's Party. Under the leadership of Father Josef Tiso, a Catholic priest. Already in April 1939, 1 month later, this government started passing anti-Jewish laws. First of all, Jews were excluded from all government positions and service. Then they were excluded from the army. Then they were ousted from schools, were excluded from public recreational facilities, and deportations started. By 1940, more than 6,000 Jews emigrated both legally and illegally. The Slovak government passed a law that permitted it to take control of all major Jewish businesses. These laws were supported by the majority of the Slovak society. Jews were required to register with the government and to state their financial status. They were forced to wear a yellow Star of David and were recruited to forced labor. In 1941, the Slovak government began deporting the Jews to concentration camps, mainly to Auschwitz. By 1942, nearly 3/4 of the Slovak Jewry had been exterminated. The Jewish leadership, especially those known as the Bratislava Working Group, was trying to postpone the transports as far as possible by bribing government officials, among others, Dieter Vysličený, who was Eichmann's representative in Slovakia and in charge of solving the Jewish problem. At this time, only Jews who had work and were carrying a certificate of being important to Slovak economy were spared from the transports. Dr. Oskar Neumann and Andrei Steiner, both from the working group, came up with the idea to convince the authorities of the necessity of Jews to the Slovak economy, creating 3 forced labor camps in Sered, in Nováky, and in Vychne. Here we see the entrance to the camp in Nováky. My father had already a reputation in his field of work, so Dr. Neumann and his aides approached him and asked him to build a cartonnage department, a cardboard department in the camp of Nováky and to manage it. My father was recently married and he would receive for himself, for his wife, and for his brother official work certificates, which were at the time a temporary protection against being transported to Poland. My mother's parents were transported a short while earlier. According to information I received from the Red Cross Search Service, they were on a transport to Žilina. We have no information what happened later. They were probably, from there, they were probably taken to Auschwitz. So my father accepted the offer. For him, the challenge was in organizing enough work, enough employment, knowing that those people employed by him will have a better chance of surviving. So my parents and my father's brother, Jakob, started their work in Nováky in August 1943. By the end of that year, the cartonnage department had more than 120 people employed. This is, not all of them are on the photo, but this is a group photo from the Department of Cardboard and Paper. Here we see a delegation of the working group visiting Nováky. In the middle, with the eyeglasses, Dr. Oskar Neumann. On the left, Juraj Spitzer, one of the leaders of Jewish resistance in Slovakia. I cannot identify the other 2 persons. I'm not sure about the woman. She might even be Gizi Fleischmann, but I have no further information on that. I've tried to compare the photo to other photos of hers. There is a certain similarity, but I'm not sure about it. Several years ago, my mother's cousin, Larry Pfeffer from Jerusalem, sent me a link to a documentary by Yad Vashem about the Shoah in Slovakia. As I was watching, I was perplexed to identify my father. This photo was taken about April 1944, when rumors insisted that the German army is going to be defeated by the Russians and liberation is near. The person in the middle here is Julius Petschuk. Julius Petschuk. He was the general director of the Ministry of Internal Affairs and thus was in charge of the forced labor camps. Left on his side is my father, answering questions considering the production processes, and right of them is Dr. Mandler, who was on the Jewish board of the camp. My father described this visit in detail in his book, so this is how I understand the situation shown. In the summer of 1944, as the Russians were getting nearer, the guards of the camp left their posts suddenly during the night and ran away. My parents, together with Jakob, with his brother Jakob, started a long march by foot, partly by trains, at first to Banska Bystrica, then to the Tatra mountains. Some of the time they were staying in a Slovak village, some of the time hiding in a self-made bunker up in the mountains. There they stayed for several months until the end of the war. Eventually, after the end of the war, they went to Budapest, where my mother met her grandfather, Rabbi Moshe Pfeffer, who survived, and also her uncle, Armin, and aunt, Dobi. In Budapest, my parents and my father's brother could join a group of the illegal Aliyah. With this group, they crossed the border to Austria by foot at night, later by train and trucks to Italy. In the port of La Spezia, they were stopped by the British military police. We see the two police boats, the bottom of the photo, and this is the ship. It's more of a boat than a ship. The British understood that these are illegal immigrants, and they prevented them from leaving the port. So the illegal immigrants, under the leadership of Yehuda Arazi, who was one of the commanders of the Haganah, started a hunger strike. This is a photo from a American Yiddish newspaper reporting about the hunger strike. The person at the front here with the eyeglasses is my father. After 33 days of being detained in the port and after 75 hours of hunger strike, the British government surrendered to international pressure, and the ship could start on the journey to Eretz Israel. This is the boat again, the ship. On the 18th of May, 1946, the ship entered at last the port of Haifa. And I think this is, at the moment, the end of the story. Of course, there's a story of what happened later, but I think this is the main part of the story. And this is the story that is being told in my father's book. Thank you for your attention.
Wow. Michael, it's
Michael, I have
been
a question for
absolutely
you.
amazing.
Was your mother with the part?
Pardon? Again, I didn't hear.
Was your mother with the partisans for a while in the Caucasian mountains?
No, they were not with the partisans. They met partisans several times, but they were not part of the partisans. No.
I think your mother told me that they were so hiding in the snow or something.
Yes.
But she had some she had some problems with her legs as a result. No.
I don't know anything about it, but they were hiding for several months in, as I said, in a self-made bunker in the mountains. It was winter, and I can assume they had also problems because it was very cold, and they definitely didn't have enough to keep them warm. So these were not easy times, definitely.
What was the movie that you were referring to that maybe I sent to you, where you found your father's photo? What was the name of it?
I don't recall the name exactly. I think I've written it somewhere. I can send it to you, but the name was something about Jews, the Holocaust, the Shoah of the Jews of Slovakia, something like that.
Was it called Among Blind Fools, by any chance?
Maybe. I really don't remember.
No.
It's maybe 2-3 years ago that you sent it to me.
Oh no, then something. I don't know what it was. I don't recall.
It's not that long ago.
You know about the Gissi Fleischmann and that photo? Doesn't seem like her likeness, but her niece lives. She has a niece and a nephew living in Israel. A niece in Tel Aviv and a nephew in Kibbutz Parmasel.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want, I can send you their email address or telephone number. Maybe they could identify it if you're interested.
It would be interesting to know who
Sure.
this woman is, and also the man on the right, the other guy.
Actually, they might know them because they were teenagers at least around that time. The
Yeah.
woman is called Sonia Bachner. When was your grandmother born? Do you remember?
When was she born?
Yes.
I have it somewhere exactly, but it was like about 1900, 1899 or 1900.
That makes sense. Okay.
Probably
So,
1899.
that makes sense, roughly. About the neologues, I don't think that the neologues were reformed. In fact, they were not, at least not in Hungary. The reform didn't keep Shabbat, they kept Sunday around that time.
Oh.
They ate non-kosher as a matter of principle also. They defined who is a Jew even today as somebody whose father is Jewish. The Neolog were more liberal. Men and women were sitting together and they moved the bima up to the front. They did some revolutionary things like that, which upset the Orthodox. But they kept Shabbat more or less, and the reform were different. At least in Hungary.
Yeah, well, in Bratislava, according to the description in my father's book, they had an organ playing on Shabbat.
Wow.
So they were not really keeping Shabbat. It was Shabbat, not on Sunday. So
I don't know. I know that the great synagogue in Budapest had an organ and a choir. And I heard that some of the people in the choir were not even Jewish, but they from the opera. I don't know if that was called neolog. I think there's something called status quo also in Hungary. But the reform was very different. But maybe that's something to look into.
It's probably, I think it's neolog is part of the reform movement. It's only part of it. It's not maybe not mainstream, but it's
that's not the way I perceive it, but maybe I'm wrong. For example, I had an uncle who was neolog in my mother's town called Bonyhad. And when he came up to Budapest after the communists took over, etc., he went to the same synagogue as my father and I in the main Orthodox synagogue. But they might have been much more liberal, not just sitting together, men and women, and other things. They might have gone to a tour, but the reform, I think, was much more radical. But I don't know, there's something to look into.
Apparently, these 60 families or so left the the mainstream Orthodox community in Bratislava as a reaction to Rabbi, I think it was the Ktav Sofer, was the son of Khatam Sofer, who was very strict. He was Khatam Sofer was very strict, and his son was, apparently for some people, he was even more strict than his father. And so they just left the community. And
apparently it happened many places. My mother's town, I think the early 1900s, maybe 1910, 1920, one night the Bima was moved. And then the Orthodox were outraged. And around the time, the two communities split.
yeah.
And I read that the diary of the community and about 20 pages were missing. People tore it out because it spoke about all kinds of unpleasant things between the two communities. They set up two synagogues. So this must have happened many places in Europe, that people split off from the Orthodox.
Unfortunately, we know it among Jews. There are so many conflicts and there's so many.
Right. There's more than the conflicts. It's the establishment of a new branch of Judaism, basically.
Yeah, but
you know,
many of our own people have the feeling or the knowledge that they know better, you know.
Well, it's more than that. Many of our people, we had something called sinat chinam, you know, that's a bit more than just knowing better.
Yeah, this is already the result of this.
But you know, this neologue and the Orthodox split was not sinat chinam. That was a different lifestyle or something.
Yeah, at least it started like this. I agree.
Now tell me, when you said that your father's family was in a camp in Poland, I guess, sent there by the Germans, and the Bratislava working group negotiated for their release. Is that what you said?
Yes. Not. I don't know if it was the working group. It was the leadership of Slovak Jewry. I don't know who was behind the negotiations.
Okay. Exactly. There's a big difference between them and the leadership and the working group.
No. But I think the idea was similar. The working group was also negotiating with the Germans to postpone the transports for money. They were trying to bribe people. It only partly succeeded, as I understood. I tried to read some sources about this period. So it wasn't really very successful. It was partly successful.
Actually, it was very successful for a number of reasons. They came up with the idea, Rabbi Weissman built up, that the Germans believed that the Jews ruled the world. And he invented a character called Felix Roth or Philip Rhodes. And he had some stationery that he brought from an expensive Swiss hotel when he was once on a trip to Switzerland. And he wrote an offer to negotiate with the Nazis for money. And the Germans wanted to negotiate with the Jewish, in quotes, the Jewish leaders of the world. And they wanted $50,000 of those days to stop the transports from Slovakia. Nobody was willing to risk, certainly not the Joint, because they had a lot of contempt for the Austrian unit, which we were there. And in the end, money was found, and then the transport stopped for about a half a year at least. And then Rabbi Weissman, so the transport ceased for quite a while until 1944, I think, in Slovakia. Rabbi Weissman and Rabbi Friedland, who was, I think, a Reform rabbi, came up with another idea that maybe we could negotiate to stop all the transports. And the Germans negotiated with them. That's called the Europa Plan. And apparently, for $2 to $3 million, they said they're willing to stop most of the transports, and about 10%, which nobody was willing to risk for us. So we really don't know how much they would have succeeded if the Jews put up the money. Third of all, they were very much involved with what's called the Auschwitz Protocol, which stopped the trains from Auschwitz, from Hungary. Two people, German Wetzler, escaped from Auschwitz, and then another two, whose name I forget. They were debriefed by the working group after they escaped to Slovakia from Auschwitz. And that was, the first one to get it was Kastner, who didn't do anything with it.
Yes.
At the end, it reached someone called Moshe Kraus, who was in Agudat Israel in Budapest, who worked with Karl Lutz. And somebody called George Montello, I think I corresponded with you about, a Romanian Jew who lived in Switzerland. He was the first secretary of the El Salvador embassy, I guess. He sent a diplomat called Manilu, Florian Manilu, to Romania to see what's with his family. By the time Manilu got there, the family no longer existed. And on the way back to Switzerland, he stopped off Manilu in Budapest illegally and got the Auschwitz report and gave it to Montello. And Montello immediately publicized it. And I talked to my historian, honest historian friend about the Holocaust. Not all of them are honest, in my opinion. That's what created a major uprising in Switzerland. There were 400 headlines about what's happening to our brothers and sisters. There were street protests. The masses were about the Jews. That made so much noise that was one of the main factors that stopped the transports from Hungary. So that's a major accomplishment. Okay. It's not the way Yad Vashem presents it. Yad Vashem, for example, says about the Europa plan, there were negotiations and it was a German SS trick.
Yeah.
The Jewish trick was that the joint and others didn't pay the 5%.
But the other, there were two ideas they had. The one was bribing the officials to postpone the transports, and the other one was, as I said, to convince the government that the Jews can work for Slovak economy instead of being sent to Poland and work there for the Germans or for the Poles.
Sure.
So they had these three camps. And the idea was, as long as the Jews are working in these camps, they will be spared from being transported. But it was not like this. I know from what my father wrote is that during the whole time that they were working there were transports, even out of these forced labor camps.
Transports to Auschwitz?
When there were transports to the east, nobody knew exactly where they were being taken to, but they were probably being taken to concentration camps, and I believe Auschwitz was one of the nearest because it was a short while behind the Polish border. So it was the nearest.
All right, Les, I asked my questions and made my comments, and now it's up to you.
Okay. So first of all, Michael, I want to thank you so much for the most, wow, this was really something absolutely profound. You gave a phenomenal presentation. It's just really amazing. Are you sure, in the description, I should have said more of a historian and a Holocaust researcher. And no, really, Michael, really, I learned so much, and the viewers, people that are going to visit the site, are going to learn so much of this very important facet of Jewish history, and especially of the Shoah education. And you presented it absolutely unbelievably. And I really, really believe that this book of your father's, it really should be translated into English, so it can have a very wide appeal. People, including myself, can read it. I just want to ask you just one or two questions. You mentioned that the family were saved in the glass house in Budapest. Was that Karl Lutz's, was it the glass houses that Karl Lutz had initiated, or, who, It was with the Swiss, that they had, but Carl Lutz played a very important role in establishing those glass houses. Did you ever hear who was responsible, or?
I suppose it had something to do with Karl Lutz, but this is something that Larry would know much better. He was nearer. I'm just I just spoke of something I learned from my father's book.
Okay.
So it's not like somebody who was witnessing the whole thing.
As far as I know, and I don't know very well, unfortunately, I didn't ask my father in time. Okay, I know it's a bit too late. My grandfather, I think, is on one of the ghettos. I think in the Budapest ghetto. Your father wrote that he was in a Swiss protected house.
Yes.
Uh-huh. So then your father probably knows better than I. He knew better than I probably. I know my father was in the glass house for a while. That was under Karl Lutz's protection. But I always thought that my grandfather was in the ghetto. But maybe I'm wrong.
So maybe it was in another house, not in the same house, but in another one.
No, but it was definitely not in that house.
Mm.
But he might have been in another house. What exactly did your father write?
I can look it up in the book, but
Yes, send it to me.
When they went to Budapest and they went to the house without even thinking, he's writing without even thinking whether the grandfather is still there, my mother's grandfather.
Yeah.
But they went there, and she knocked on the door, and really he opened the door, and it was, of course, a very emotional moment for all of them, especially for my mother and her grandfather. And then he asked them inside, and they were drinking a coffee. It was not real coffee, but the coffee that was then. And they told each other of about their whereabouts in the couple of last years. And the grandfather told them that he was saved in a Swiss house, and also his son Armin and his family was saved, but the other son Arpad was vanished, and they did not have any information about. Later, it was apparent that he was killed. But at that point, they didn't know anything about him.
Something is incorrect.
Then they went.
It's not correct. Yeah. My father was, for a while, found refuge for a while in the Swiss protected house called the Glass House, after he was in forced labor. But my mother was hiding, and so was I. We were not under Swiss protection. So it's a misunderstanding.
You were not together. Yeah.
No, we're not together. So maybe my grandfather misunderstood. It could be. You know, some of these some things are very confusing during that time, and people didn't exactly know what really.
Maybe it's my failure, my point, because my father didn't specifically write that they were all together. I assumed they were together. But
we're not even saved separately. I don't think my mother has Swiss papers.
I
don't think so. As far as I know, I certainly.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm a Swiss citizen. I don't even know about it, but I don't think so. By the way, I have a comment about the photograph where your mother and her sister were in the building where my grandfather lived.
Yeah.
First of all, it's not a terrace. The houses in Budapest many times had an open space in the middle.
Yes.
And that's called, again, it was called gang. I don't know why. And then you could walk all around, basically.
Yeah, well, I tried to call it an inner terrace. I don't know how to.
It's an inner public terrace because it was not by apartments, but all around. I think that might be worthwhile to retouch, to have somebody retouch that photo. It's an important photo.
But this photo, I don't have the photo. The original photo I don't have. It's I don't know where I got it, but there is a. I said at the beginning that maybe I didn't say it after reading the book and getting interested in family history and so on. I started to research. Started with a genealogical research. So it's not only until about the days in Bratislava that we're speaking about, but I came a long way back already in my father's family, somewhere beginning of the 18th century, and in my mother's family much earlier, in Prague of the 14th century, and from there there's a lead back to Spain. So there's a whole. It's very interesting. Until today,
I think
after more
you
than
did a
20
great
years,
job.
I'm still interested. So
No
why did I
wonder,
say that?
no wonder you call a doctor. You could get a doctorate on this. You know?
I agree.
A second doctorate.
Definitely. At least.
Michael, can I just
At
ask?
least a doctorate.
I mentioned that because I don't know if you're familiar with this platform of MyHeritage.
Yeah.
Yes,
I've heard about it.
Yeah. So I'm in MyHeritage already for many years, since the beta version, the first version. And they have, meanwhile, they have a service. If you have photos on the website, like on your family tree, on their platform, you can refresh the photos, and you can even get colors into the photos. So now all the colored photos that you have seen now, these are not original colors. This is being colored with this technique.
Because I thought it was interesting seeing those photos.
Yeah, it's a great thing because the photos look more lively.
It comes alive.
In my opinion.
It comes alive.
Yeah.
No, but the retouching is another story. There are a number of cracks on that photo. Maybe that could be straightened out. I think I saw in Rehov King George in Jerusalem, some photo store years ago offered the retouching service.
Yeah.
I think it's something that photo shops usually do commonly. Maybe there's some software for it. It's worth thinking about. Very interesting what you told them.
Maybe I will have to print it, and then it's on paper. But it's an idea.
No. The main thing is not on paper. But there might be software for it, you know, where you actually need the file, which is what you have. Maybe the retouching is done on a file, not on paper.
Yes, of course.
But something to look into.
Michael, can I just ask you?
I read about this service. I think it was done by an Israeli company, colorizing. About a year ago, I read about that in the Jerusalem Post. That they take old photos and they colorize them, just like the colorized movies, you know, early movies of Charlie Chaplin, etc.
Exactly. So MyHeritage just took this technique and applied it on their platform.
Oh, they worked. I think they might have worked with MyHeritage. I think so, something like that, with a vague memory. By the way, Hannah Lisa, remember I mentioned to you Hannah Lisa, an artist. She's from Dunasere.
I remember. Yes.
And it's pronounced hey, like L-Y in Hungarian is here. Hey, Dunasere, hey, Hirai.
I still receive every year an invitation to the Azkara at the cemetery of Dunajska Streda from.
I almost went last year.
What's his name? Kornfeld, Mr. Kornfeld.
Right. Team managers as well.
I believe there's some kind of family connection with the Kornfelds on my mother's family.
Maybe. Never heard. Maybe. I almost went there last year because Hannah thought that I would be interested in going, and it didn't work out. That was, I think, the 70th anniversary or 75th anniversary of the Shoah in Dunasere.
I think Les wanted to.
Yes, well, Michael, can I just ask you, when your father, when he had the book bound, and he had it like self-published for the first time.
Yes.
When did you read the copy of that book? When did you actually read it? Was it soon after that?
Yeah, soon
Okay.
after that, because I was already reading German and understanding German at the time. Yes.
And then did you ask him questions about the book, or did you ask him to speak to you about his experiences,
Yeah.
or if he could open up to you?
At first, I just read parts of the book. I didn't read the whole book right away. It took me some time, but I did ask him some questions. What interested me back then was especially details about the family, because he's writing in the book like who was the grandfather and his father and so on, a number of names. In 2007, it was, yes, 2007, I visited the archives in Bochnia, which is a major town in the area where my father's family used to live. Not in this town, but this town is like I don't know, in German they say Kreisstadt, like the city or the town where the local authorities for the area is situated. So they have the archives for the area, and I found out that he had some mistakes there because, well, mistakes. He was about 70 or older when he wrote his memoirs, and these were memories he had about things his grandfather told him when he was a little child. And it's also possible that he didn't get it right the way his grandfather told him the story. It's also possible that the grandfather didn't have all the information. So there was some informations I received, new informations I received from the. So these were mainly the questions I asked my father at the time.
And was it very difficult for you to read the book and see this is who your father is that you grew up with, and it was kept quiet from you, or that you couldn't ask, or you felt uncomfortable asking, and now you're reading it and it's in the open and it's for the public to, you know, to see something that is very private within your family, and now it's become public. Was that difficult for you?
Several parts of the book, especially certain pages, were very difficult for me to read. And but not as if you mean when the book was published, was really published for the public, I didn't have any problems with that. But when I first read these pages,
yeah,
it was difficult for me, and I didn't speak to my father about these pages, about this period. Now thinking about it, I also had my own blockade, so to speak, after all these years, to speak about the Holocaust with my father. Well, we spoke about it, but more like general terms and not about really the harder issues.
So as a psychologist, as a very preeminent psychologist, do you think what your parents did was the correct thing, not to traumatize you in a way by discussing the Shoah? Because there are many people that I've met who grew up second generation survivors, that they, just like you, they felt there was this unspoken, they didn't want to upset their parents by asking. And then it was like a a secret agreement that we don't want to upset
Yes.
our parents, and therefore we're not going to ask them. And
Mm.
looking back, a lot of them said, if only we would have asked them, or if only we would have had the opportunity to speak to them. But the parents felt they didn't want to traumatize their children, that they should have any, they wanted them to grow up as normal as possible, and they didn't want to impart their horrors onto their children. So it's a very difficult balance. But do you think, looking back, that your parents made the right decision not to speak to you about it? Or I know it's a hard question. It's a very difficult question, and there are no simple answers.
It's a very difficult issue. First of all, I'm not sure that my parents decided, you mean really decided not to speak about it. I think it wasn't possible to speak about it, so they didn't. It was not that they were, I don't think they were discussing the issue among themselves and decided, you know what, we're not going to speak to our son about it. It was not, how do you say, I missed the word now in English. In German, they say Bewusstsein.
It's not the topic of conversation.
Pardon?
It was not the topic of conversation at the time. Now,
yes.
Every day you hear about the Holocaust. At that time, people wanted to start a new life.
It was not a known decision. It was not a logical decision. It was something that was happening within their heads, where they probably didn't have much of control about it. But this is the one.
I would say it was different. I two of my best friends in New York were from Hungary also, and they went through the Shoah as well, just as I did. We never ever spoke about that because we were living in a new world. We started a new life. Today, I mean, you didn't hear about the Shoah and Shoah survivors all the time, or Shoah movies. It was not a fashion. Today it's a fashion.
There's one another point that my father doesn't mention in his book, but I know from stories that I heard years ago. When they came to Israel, my father and also his brother, who was with him, Yaakov, the younger brother, they were greeted at the port of Haifa by their older brother, who was already in Israel, and he escorted them to Tel Aviv and so on. And on the way, they started telling they had the necessity, or to tell him whatever happened there, because it was clear to them he doesn't know anything. And they started, and then he said, you know what, don't talk about it, because if you speak about it, nobody would buy it. Nobody would
believe it. They wouldn't believe it.
Anyway. So this was also a point, I think, where my father at least understood there's no interest. Pardon? Larry's frozen.
That's an Israeli story. That in Israel, people who went through the Shoah felt contempt. In New York, there was no such a problem, or in Hungary, but it was not a fad. But I know here, I mean, the children used to call somebody else a sabon, it was a square, okay? It was an actual contempt for somebody who was in the Shoah. They read Tom Segner's book, The Seventh Million, the television program about that. There was actual contempt for Holocaust. But in Israel, not elsewhere, not in New York and not in Hungary, we still didn't talk about it that much.
Yeah.
It was not a topic.
Mark,
I watch Fox News usually. Fox News, about the American politics, etc. And I noticed that the women are usually blonde now. They were not born blonde, but they paint their hair blonde. And one side they have a long hair side, because that became a fashion. That's how you appear. One side of the hair is in the front. People know how to follow a fashion. If something doesn't sound good, it doesn't look good, like for example, when there was the riot by the Congress, January 6th, then the leadership of the Congress didn't want the National Guard to be there. It doesn't look good. So somebody made up the word, it's not good optics. So not everybody uses the term, it's not good optics. Michal said many years ago, monkey see, monkey do. People know how to behave because somebody else does the same thing. They must know the psychology. So I think with the Holocaust stories, it was not a fashion, not a fad. People remembered it. But they also wanted to start a new life. And now it's very easy today when everybody has a new life, new Israel, which is really a modern country, certainly in America. And now it's possible to talk about it, and Steven Spielberg's, and I think that there's too much talk about it. In my view. In those days, it was not the case. Also, friends, I never spoke about Hungary with them or about Hungarian poets or etc. We started a new life, not because somebody told us. We're not interested. We left Hungary to start a new life. And the same thing is probably true of your parents and my parents and many others.
Les, you asked me as a psychologist about the issue.
Because it's a very fascinating topic.
Let me just say one or two sentences about that. Of course, we know nowadays, not nowadays, already it's a long time that we know that people who are traumatized, and everybody who survived the Holocaust was traumatized. No question about it. People are traumatized. It is better if they speak about it. Of course, you have to find the right doses. And we know from experiences in Israel, soldiers who are traumatized, this is something that was understood in Israel much, much earlier than in other countries. The best way to prevent this Helem Krav, this trauma, this war trauma and so on, is to start the treatment, therapy, or whatever, as soon as possible. Even a few hours after the event. Of course,
you think that your parents would have had a different life? Your parents would have had a different life if they started talking about it every day?
I didn't say
right
that.
After the show?
I don't know. I don't know.
No. What do you think? What do you think?
This is, hypothesizing.
Yeah. No,
I know as a child, Larry, I know as a child, I heard that my father was sometimes out of his sleep, he was shouting,
Not me, maybe.
Yeah, I knew something was wrong, but I didn't. It made me fear. Something is wrong with him, and I don't know exactly what, but I cannot speak to him about it. So I don't know if my parents would have had the chance, as they came to Israel, then still Palestine, it was still pre-state Israel. If they had the chance then to speak about it, to see a therapist about it, if he wouldn't have these nightmares, I don't know. It's difficult to say.
Michal, did your parents have a lot of friends that came from the Shoah, or did they associate with friends that were also who came from Europe?
With definitely their friends, their best friends. Well, they had a kind of a
family gatherings,
a group sure. of people, mainly from Czechoslovakia.
And did they speak about the Shoah?
No, they were, they were actually they were very, very social, very active, very, they were inviting people. This group, I call it a group. It was a group of people mainly from Ostrava, but some of them were from Prague or other cities, and but they were all speaking German, which was important culturally. They came from a similar background, more or less, even though some of them came from religious families, other not, but it was, the culture, the language, and so on. And they were all, or most of them, interested in music, in literature, in news, in politics, and so on. So they were meeting, I think it was maybe even every week, alternating in different apartments. And several times I had the chance of being there when they were guests of my parents. We had a piano, and there were at least two persons who were playing very, very good. And they were playing hits. They were not playing classic. They were playing hits that people could sing together, not Israeli songs, more songs from the past. And they were telling jokes. They were singing. There was always a lot of joy, a lot of and as far as I can say, at least most of these people, if not all of them, were survivors of the Holocaust. They were all in some way or another affected.
Not that because everybody from that area was affected by the Shoah. They didn't
Yes,
necessarily
yes,
speak them out because they survived the Shoah, but they came from the same cultural background.
But maybe it was even a reaction, you might say, after having suffered so much. This urge, this need to, to be happy, to
And
be
to enjoy
joyous, to enjoy life, because
I'm just, I'm not a Cohen or a Levi, I'm just Israel, So Israel like me, it seems like they came from the same cultural background to another country. And obviously they wanted to be with people like them, who knew the same songs in their youth. It was called the Schlager in Hungary, also
yes,
over there. They knew the same people, they knew the same museums, the same mountains, the same Bratislava, whatever they knew. That's natural.
There's a lot in common.
I told you, two of my best friends were from Hungary. With one of them actually went to Cheder in Budapest also. And why were they my best friends? Because we had a similar cultural background, nothing to do with the Shoah, nothing to do with anything. We spoke the same language, we came from the same place more or less. Our parents were similar, Orthodox, and that's natural. I think to dress everything up in the costume of the Shoah, I think actually is not helpful because it's a distraction. I think.
No, it's not. I didn't say that. I just said.
No, you didn't say that. No, you didn't say that.
Okay.
But that could be implied by somebody that obviously they all Holocaust survivors. They all wanted to cry together, but they didn't want to cry. They played music. That's baloney. That's not the reason.
No. I just mean that.
They have the same. I'm not saying it about you, not at all. They have the same cultural background. They're not. I'm a horse like me in psychology. It seems like that's a simple explanation. And, trust has a lot of value.
My father was, I think he was in the 80s maybe, that he became member of Bnei Brit. And he became a member of Bnei Brit, of a lodge called Yedidut in Hebrew, Societa. And it was named Societa after a Bnei Brit lodge that existed in I think in Brno, in Czechia, not in Slovakia, in Czechia. And the members of this lodge, or at least most of them, came from Czechia and from Slovakia. So also another similar background, German speaking. They were speaking German during the sessions in Israel, a German-speaking lodge. There were a number of German-speaking lodges, by the way. But so it's another another example maybe for people who are trying to get together with people who understand their background, culturally, language, and so on.
So Michael, I have
parents
to ask.
Belong to. Okay, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Or Larry, you go ahead and then I'll ask.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, so Michael, this is like a very difficult question, but I think I have to ask it. Being a second generation survivor, I think everybody would want to ask, what made you want to go to Germany? And wasn't that exceptionally difficult for your parents, your decision to go live in Germany? And forgive me if I'm asking this because I hope I'm not out of line in asking you this question, but I'm intrigued to know.
The question is a very good question, and no problem about it. It's not the first time I've been asked that question.
I'm sure.
It's understood. First of all, about my parents. My parents, it's very interesting. My parents were, let me see, I think it was in the 70s, 74. My father went to Germany the first time in end of the 60s already, on a professional visit to see a fair, a very large, a very big fair in Hanover in Germany. And he got befriended with the people where he was staying. They rented a room in their house, and they got good friends. And then my parents came to visit, and then I went with my father together again to this fair and to others. So it wasn't only Germany; it was Italy, Germany, and Holland. But in Germany, we were we also met these people, and they were really, I mean, good friends. They were good friends. They had very good, very warm relations with this German family. They invited them. They were staying in my parents' apartment in Tel Aviv when they came to visit. Anyway, my parents went. I don't remember exactly when the first time both of them went together to Europe. I think it must have been around 1970. I don't know, probably beginning of the 70s, let's say. And they were also in Austria, they were also in Germany. They were traveling around. And wherever they were, they made friends, because my parents were very open persons, both of them. My mother probably more than my father, but both of them were open, and everywhere they were, they would speak to people in a shop, in the street, in the station, at the station, and so on. And then they started talking and asking questions, and getting to know each other. They were very open and they're very social. And it's very interesting. They did not have, despite the past, despite everything, they did not have this, how should I say, this grouch, about the present, about people living in the present. of course, they could not know what the people they were speaking to were doing, if they were old enough, what they were doing 20, 30, 40 years ago. But they were open, and they were, of course, they were not, if they knew, they would not be friendly to somebody like this, but they considered every person, no matter which religion, which nationality, and so on, first of all, as a person. And if the person was sympathetic, was friendly, was open, was kind, then it was okay. So I never got, from my parents, I never got the impression that I should have any bad sentiments towards a certain people, in that case, German people. This is one point. I wouldn't have thought about going to Germany because I didn't have any interest or any cause. And then I met my wife, and my wife, her family came from Romania to Düsseldorf, and I mentioned she's a physician, and she, the same as I, both of us are only children. So we got married, and we lived in Tel Aviv. And after about 4 years, her father got very sick, and she was really in trouble about it. And there were no computers and Zoom conferences and iPhones and so on. And it was very difficult for her. And I saw it, and I told her, you know what? I saw she was really suffering. And I told her, you know what? If I can find a project, maybe doing a PhD, maybe doing research, maybe kind of something different, we can go for 1, 2, 3 years. This was the idea. Of course, as life is, it took longer. First of all, the illness was longer, and then at a certain point he passed away, and the mother was left alone. She was also not very healthy, and so on. So meanwhile, we had already one child that we took with us. He was a few months old, and then we got another child, and you know, children go to school, and so to be trying to be objective, it's difficult when you speak about yourself, but I'm trying to get out of my skin. Life in Germany is much more comfortable than in Israel. No question about it. Things go more smoothly here than in Israel, which wouldn't affect me to say I would rather live in Germany than in Israel. We still have a plan to go back to, you know, I am already retired. My wife has you say it in English, a practice?
A practice, yeah.
Practice. So she will also sell it at a certain point, but at the moment she still doesn't want, because she likes what she's doing. And so it's in plan, but it takes time, unfortunately.
And your parents, they came to Düsseldorf? Your parents?
My parents? Yes.
And were they in the retirement home?
Pardon?
Did they stay in the retirement home in Düsseldorf? In the retirement home, in the old age people's home?
Oh, no, only my father.
Your father. So Michael, I want to ask you, there's a South African family, maybe you could have heard about them, very interesting, the Weinberg family, that they came back from South Africa to the retirement home in Düsseldorf to spend the last years of their life.
Oh, what's the name of the family?
Weinberg.
Weinberg.
Weinberg, and they came back to the old age home in Düsseldorf, the Jewish old age home, and they spent the remainders of their life in Düsseldorf, the Jewish old age home.
Hmm. When was that?
So I met their son, who's now 90. So this was quite a few years ago. But they lived in Germany, and they left in the late 30s to go to South Africa from Germany. And in the remaining years of their life, they were invited back to Germany, and they were very happy in the Jewish old age home in Düsseldorf. So
I must ask my wife, because my wife is also every week she's visiting. She has also patients in the Jewish home for the elderly.
So this
And
must
she
have been
knows
about this must have been about 30 years ago.
Yeah, but she lives longer than me in Düsseldorf since her childhood already. So perhaps she knows the name, she knows the family. I don't know. I don't know. I didn't know.
Larry, can I just ask a last question, and then I'm going to give over to you? As I'm sure a most incredible psychologist and psychotherapist, did you ever use Viktor Frankl or Dr. Eugene Heimler's their works? Did that influence you at all? Viktor Frankl's philosophy, and there's also Eugene Heimler, also a survivor, who also was a in psychology, and Viktor Frankl. Have you heard of Viktor Frankl?
Viktor Frankl, of course, of course.
There was also Eugene Heimler. Eugene Heimler was also a very, very interesting psychologist who's not so well known, but he should be. This is one of his books that he wrote, and it's called Night of the Mist. So he was a very primitive psychologist, and he used the adversity to bring out the positivity. But did you use any of Viktor Frankl's philosophy in your work, or did it influence you at all?
In my therapeutic work, no. I remember one incident, one talk I had with a patient that he was in a very difficult life situation, and I wasn't using Viktor Frankl's method of logotherapy, but I used the existentialist element of his philosophy, let's say, of his way of thinking, and I tried to work with this patient about looking about the meaning of things that are important to him, the meaning of things that are happening to him. Very, very superficially, you might say it was related to Viktor Frankl, but I wouldn't say that I used his method. No.
Anyway, but it's amazing because I think both also had, especially with logotherapy, it's now universal, and they had a big impact on, like with Eugene Heimler. He actually went back to Berlin to give over his thoughts on being a survivor and how he managed to become a psychologist, and how he managed to turn his life around, also from adversity to positivity. And he would give courses in Berlin, and fascinating. It's actually quite amazing.
What was the name again? Eugene Hyman?
Heimler. Heimler. Very, very interesting. So this is his book, where it had the introduction by Elie Wiesel. So his wife, Miriam, I know her quite well, and she's given me these books. But very interesting because he actually went back to Berlin, and he helped people whose parents possibly could have been perpetrators, but he didn't have this this hatred, you try to change hatred to more to understand and to bring healing. And I think that's what you do as well. That's being in Germany, I'm sure, treating German patients. It's actually something unbelievable what you've done. It's not such a simple thing. A second generation survivor to treat patients whose parents, possibly grandparents, could have been involved in perpetrating such evil, and you there in Düsseldorf. I think it's unbelievable. And kol hakavod to you. I think it's amazing.
I don't know if it's kol hakavod, but I was maybe also because of the way I was brought up by my parents. I mean, something that you get from the atmosphere, from whatever, from way of life, is to approach every person as a person. And in my first years in Germany, I must confess, when I saw somebody was older on the street, an older person, it occurred to me to think, who knows what happened, what was he doing, what was his role, and so on. Of course. But it was only in the beginning. But then I learned to really to approach people as they are, and give them the credit of being there and asking me to help them.
And Michael, I have to, and then I'm going to give over to Larry. Have you ever had any anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish feeling from any of your patients, or being in Düsseldorf, knowing that you are an Israeli, knowing that you are a second generation survivor? Have you experienced any of this anti-Semitism or this negativity?
Well, I have been working in a psychiatric clinic for about 27 years. And from the start, from the beginning, everybody, I mean, it was a larger clinic, but everybody who knew me, who had contact to me, and with the years, everybody knew me. But because I was one of the persons who speak out his mind, his opinion, which is not always so good, but never mind, this is another story. But everybody that knew me knew that I was Jewish and knew that I was Israeli. By the way, not all Germans know exactly that it's the same. You know, it's for some people it's you're Israeli. Oh, and you're also Jewish. It's like you know. So this was clear. I never had any forms of anti-Semitic remarks or whatever in my presence at work. The only thing is that they knew I was Israeli, so like in the 80s, maybe beginning of the 90s, when things were happening in Israel, like problems with a war or an attack on Gaza or whatever, things, unfortunately, things happen again and again. I was even like peace treaties, peace negotiations, and so on. I was always asked as the person, as a representative of Israel, of course, which was okay for me because it gave me the opportunity to try and open other person's eyes and to give them also some other information than they get from the media, which is, I must say, that the German media is not the worst in Europe, but it's not very good. Generally speaking, there are exceptions which are really very good to us as Jews and as Israelis, but many sources in media don't represent the situation as it is, and it's biased and so on and so on. We don't need to speak so long about it. and very often it was when somebody had a critical opinion about whether it was Begin or Shamir or whoever it was. Begin, not it was Shamir or later Netanyahu, whoever it was. I was kind of asked, how come this is happening? How come he said so and so and so on? So I was always trying to explain. I cannot say that I was always successful, but I think some of the persons who were really interested to listen and to know, they got some new information. Now this is at work. Now otherwise I also never experienced personal forms of anti-Semitism, but of course anti-Semitism is there. I don't have to tell you. You read newspapers and you watch news. Every now and then there are things happening. I must say the authorities, the government, the local authorities and so on, are very strict against it, are very are trying to support Jewish life in Germany. Just it's not an example, but by association, 2 days ago there was a new stamp issued, a German stamp. You know, you are doing with stamps, you know. Exactly. A new stamp, 1700 years of Jewish life in Germany. And there is, amongst others, the word Chai in Hebrew letters. I mean, it's only a gesture. It doesn't put anti-Semitism away. But the general attitude of the authorities is very positive.
Yeah.
But there are groups, there are right-wing groups, there are left-wing groups, there are Islamic groups, there are pro-Palestinian groups, there's so many groups. And now we have, with Corona, we have now the ones who, what do you call it in English, who see, I don't have the word in English, conspiracy.
Yeah, conspiracy theories.
Conspiracy theories, exactly. And among them, there are strong views that Jews and Israel or whoever have also something to do with it. So if something's happening, just look for the Jew. This is still there among many people, but it's still a minority. It's also a dangerous minority, but it's a minority.
Larry, have you got any comments?
2 comments and a question, and then I'll finish because I think it's Michael is going on too long, and he probably has to rest as well. First, we said that many people don't know that Israelis and Jews are the same, right? Michael, you said something like that. Actually, there is something to that, because I know many Israelis who consider themselves to be Israelis and not Jews.
Yes.
You know, in fact, they emphasize Chiloni. You know, I was watching now the impeachment proceedings in the Congress.
Mm-hmm.
And in the beginning, priest, I guess, opened up the session. I've never saw anything like that in the Knesset. The Knesset session is opened up by a rabbi, okay? Many times, you mentioned God, etc. I never heard anything about, you know, this fellow God mentioned in the Knesset of Israel. So this identity of Israeli and Jewish, and a lot of arguments about that in Israel that you don't know. Second of all, anti-Semitism, I must say, you know, I lived in Hungary and America here, in that sequence. I never saw so much anti-Semitism that I see here in Israel. I must say that, against Haredim.
Mm.
One of our friends, who's from Europe, once said that when I see the Haredim, I understand the Nazis.
Mm.
Once one of our friends was attacking the Haredim, and there are a lot of problems everywhere with the Haredim also. Nobody's pure tzaddikim, that's for sure. So they were attacked. One of our friends, another friend attacked the Haredim, and I said something that I didn't come to Israel to hate anybody. So I said, Atem, okay, meaning I am together with the Haredim, also became part of the hated group. I once collected a whole bunch of anti-Semitic comments in Israel from leading people like Shulamit Aloni, Professor Zimmerman, who you might know.
Mm.
And one of them said that the Haredim should be hung. You know, it hung on a lamppost, with a lot of them. I saw a poster from, I think, I forgot the name of the town near Tel Aviv, Kfar Saba. There was, I think there are some Haredim living there, and the children are going to a kindergarten. So there was a poster. They should be machine gunned before they got older. Okay, that's like in Eretz Israel. And then about Shoah, you heard about Aleph Bet Gimel Dalet Yeshua, right? Aleph Bet Yeshua. He said at the Hebrew University the following: just as we drove the Germans crazy, now we drive the Palestinians crazy. What does that mean? The Holocaust justifier.
Mm.
Okay. All of these things are, it's very easy to say anti-Semitism in Germany. And I always say, what about us? So I organize many events about the rescue. I'm usually not interested in the Shoah. It's not the topic for me. I wouldn't want my children or grandchildren to go to Auschwitz, God forbid. I didn't survive that they should move in there, you know. Also, I think something should be kept out of the normal life. We should be in a special place that we can only imagine. It's so terrible. Once you go there, it's a normal place after a while. And one of the events I invited, I think it was about George Mantello, who was the first secretary of the Salvador mission in Switzerland. And I invited a very nice woman, Susie, forgot her name. She was the ambassador of El Salvador. He said, when you point with somebody with one finger, with three fingers, you're pointing at yourself. It's true, right? You know, you put your hand out, point with one finger, the three others point to you. I always ask, what about the Jews? Okay, I know that during the Shoah, I know that Hashem, you know, that's, I keep pestering you with my theories about rescue and this obstruction by Jews during the Shoah. Yad Hashem speak about Churchill, how terrible he was, and Pope Pius, how terrible he was during the Shoah. Not one word about what the Jewish leadership was doing. Were sabotaging the rescue. So I'm really not too interested in discussions about anti-Semitism because it's not an honest discussion. The honest discussion would say, well, what is happening in Israel, first of all? Okay, do we have anti-Semitism here? We certainly have a lot of hatred over here.
Mm.
Also, by the way, some of it, there are some problems, okay, but you know, when I went to a synagogue, there was a time when I went to a conservative synagogue for a while, and the synagogue's door was burnt. So right away, I was very scared. What's happening here? So right away, I said the Haredim are burning down the synagogue, you know, like you say, as Brent, it's burning.
Mm.
So I joined, I became friends with the rabbi, and tried to find out what's happening. We shouldn't hate each other. That's not why we're here. One of the guys on the table, where four of us were sitting around, decide what to do, said they should hang the Haredim, but with lot of them, okay? So I think when we speak about anti-Semitism, we should be, about anything, we should be honest. By the way, I have no excuse, I have only one excuse for being honest, if I am. I went to a cheder called Torah Semes, you know. I don't know too much Torah, but at least, you know, the word Emes I understand. We should be honest. No, but these are my comments. Now, I have a question, much shorter. Did your parents belong to Hitavdut Ole Czechoslovakia?
Yes.
Did they know somebody called Steiner?
Yes.
He was the head of it.
Yes. Well, there was there were at least two Steiners. There was Steiner,
There was a David Steiner.
who had the printing shop, the bookshop in
Oh, in
Bratislava.
Israel.
This was the famous Steiner.
They're cousins.
And there was another. There was
Well, actually,
another,
I knew.
there was another
Go ahead,
Steiner who had. They had a shop in Tel Aviv on the Allenby Street for shoes, orthopedic shoes. I'm not sure if they were related to Steiners.
I'm talking about the two Steiners who I knew were related to the bookshop in Bratislava, the Steiner shop.
Yeah.
One of them was called. One of them became friendly with David Steiner in Jerusalem. And he was hiding in a bunker in Bratislava, and he said that Rabbi Weissmandl around Pesach sent a non-Jewish man called Natali, who was part of the working group. And Rabbi Weissmandl made wine from raisins in his bunker. And he wrote a patek that you can drink it, it's not Nesach, okay? And then when he was a boy, he received this wine together with others. And his cousin, I think, was the head of the Hitavlut or the Czechoslovakia in Tel Aviv. Your parents knew them, you think?
Probably. I'm not sure about it. They were members, and they were receiving kind of a newsletter, of course printed, not newsletter, what we today call newsletter, mail.
Right.
There was a newsletter with news about what's happening, and there were, I think in earlier years, there were also events like lectures and so on, but later it was only the newsletter that they were receiving.
I have to make one last comment about Germany. I grew up in Budapest, and my parents, and Hungary was not very different than Germany. The Hungarians did.
Yeah.
You can't say that there's no Hungarians. Some Hungarians did terrible things, not the Hungarians. You can't say.
Yeah, of course.
I was always wondering, how did my parents, continued living there after the war? And I never heard my parents cursing Hungarians or trying to find out what everybody did. They tried to live a normal life. And my parents brought a woman, I think once a week, to teach me German. It's interesting. So I didn't have this total allergy to Germany. I guess because they, just like your parents, they didn't generalize about Germans and German language, etc. Although I'm sure they had very bad memories, but there's a tendency to generalize, like about the Poles. That all the Poles are anti-Semitic. We sucked it from their mother's milk. It's a terrible thing to say. One shouldn't generalize. Sometimes one should generalize. Study physics and mathematics, and then you generalize. Otherwise, you can't have formulas. You shouldn't generalize all the time.
Exactly. It's the same.
I really appreciate that. Yeah. Sorry. Go on.
I just wanted to say the same as you shouldn't generalize, saying, for instance, all Jews are clever.
Yeah.
We do say things like that, right?
The
examples you brought about people saying things about religious people, about Haredim, whoever, are a proof that it's not true. So you should not generalize.
No, but that's also not exactly true. Right now we have a cheder over here, a yeshiva, and now we have a chevruta. There's a chevruta.
Yes.
You have to argue a little bit. In every good chevruta, you have to argue a bit, right? I had a discussion like this with a relative of mine in St. Louis, Missouri. My aunt's granddaughter, who works at the Holocaust Museum there. And the issue was about stereotypes. I think that there are some Jewish stereotypes. Jews, for example, Jews who are really Jews, and they're not really Reform or past Reform, totally secular. There are certain attributes. They go to a synagogue. Synagogue has complete. You have to know this time, this Rosh Hashanah, you omit this parak, you put in something else. On Pesach, you put this in. You have to remember all these things. You have to use your noodles. You have to think. And then if you're a boy, and all these girls also, you go to a cheder. You have to learn another language, Hebrew. If you went in Hungary, you have to learn some Yiddish, because how did we learn in the cheder? We're teaching from Hebrew, from Loshen Kodesh to Yiddish, you know. You have to learn a lot. You have to learn all the laws about Shabbos and about the Pesach and about everything else. So in the end, learning is part of being a Jew. Okay, for Jews who are really Jews, not in the periphery or outside of the periphery. So obviously that has some kind of a side effect. I mean, there's a lot of mental calisthenics. Mind is working all the time, right? Because you always have to say, also you have to learn all the people. Many people learn Mincha and Ma'ariv by heart, and don't do the Siddur. All of this probably does something to your mind. So there is such a thing as there's such a thing as a Jew and a Jewish accomplishment, which is typical of a certain group of Jews. You can't generalize, and obviously there are results. You know, most of the Nobel Prizes by percentage come to the Jews, right? It's not an accident. Why do they come to the Jews by percentage? It's such a small people. Because the Jews value learning. They practice learning all the time, because all the time, especially now, people have the Daf Yomi, and then they study with their rabbi, the Parashat HaShavua, all that. What does Rashi say, and what does this one, what does Rabbi Soloveitchik say? You're all the time exposed to knowledge, you know. So that does something. It's not correct to say probably that you can't totally generalize. But there are categories amongst Jews, that's for sure. No? So you and I agree in the Chavruta, or we have a machloket?
We can discuss, we can have a machloket, but in the end, like always in the Talmud, there's a machloket, but in the end, there's there are five pages of machlokes. And in the end, there's an agreement. There is at least how the halacha is. So you have to have some kind of concept.
What is a halacha? What is a halacha in this example? In this case, well, you know, when people are going to listen to our discussion in this Gemara, there's a new Gemara that we're just writing. You know, so, you are Bet Shammai or you're Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai, etc. It's recorded. What are our future generations supposed to learn from this? Can you generalize a little bit, or it's not kosher to generalize at all? What do you say?
Well, you are challenging me. No, I think we agree. This is our agreement. In the end, the halacha, that we should be careful on one hand, but we should respect every person, and that we should not generalize. Exactly.
No, but this rabbi who's not a rabbi says, me, you're a different rabbi. This one, who's not a rabbi, says, but you should generalize sometimes. Otherwise, it's politically correct not to generalize. But you take a typical Orthodox community, they excel in certain things that other size communities don't excel in intellectually. No?
This is why I said we should be careful. Careful.
No.
Sometimes
careful
careful being
what does careful mean? What does careful mean? I mean, statistically, you take a community of, let's say, in a frat or someplace. I don't know too many people in a frat. That's it. It's an Orthodox community. There must be something about them that in some Chiloni community maybe don't see that much after a couple of generations. No? Because, they're studying all the time. They don't go to discotheques. The lifestyle is different. So there must be something that's also different about them, right? In achievements or in preferences, no? We shouldn't generalize at all. This rabbi doesn't accept that. What does that rabbi say in Düsseldorf? the Düsseldorfer Rabbi.
I agree. I'm sorry, but
The Bible,
you don't want me to agree with you, but
I don't want you to agree with me. No, but there's another Rebbe over here, by the way, who's quiet. The Beit Vegana Rebbe, you know, is a Beit Vegan, the Rebbe of Beit Vegan. Dr. Les Glassman is so far an observant. I don't know, he should take sides, so my side.
Yes,
Machloket, he should take my side.
We're known as people of the book. So, you know, there's a reason why we're known as people of the book. You know, we might be the chosen people, but it doesn't mean that one's better than any other people. So I don't know. That's my feeling. We might be the.
It does mean something.
Just to be the example, we are there to set we should be there to set an example, and to set the example. But it doesn't mean that we're better than anyone else. It really doesn't.
No, the better is a totally different question. But I mean, the fact that we get most of the Nobel Prizes, doesn't that mean something? I'm not talking about the chauvinist, but it means something. You know who gets who is in second position by a percentage of?
It's interesting that even those Israelis
Who do you think is a second?
who say they're not Jewish, they're just Israelis, they're also proud of the Jewish Nobel laureates.
That's true.
That's it. They want only to take the good things, you know.
No, but you know, who do you think is in the second position of Nobel Prizes? Besides the Jews are number one. Again, by percentage of people.
Americans.
No, by religion.
By religion? Well,
no, religion, not
Christian, of course.
No, Christian is too big a group.
Too big.
Protestants. No, not after the Jews is the Protestants.
Okay.
And then the Catholics. Why? Because in the Catholics you cannot ask questions; they have dogmas. And I heard that until very recently, until a few hundred years ago, the Catholics, the average, besides the priests, the people didn't have a Bible. They didn't read the Bible. I heard. I'm not sure it's true. Okay, well, you certainly in Catholicism you have a dogma all the time. You know? You don't ask questions. There's no arguments. In fact, there was a rabbi who I had a chance to know well, Rabbi Nolan. He was the head of Yeshiva University, both the chancellor and the Rosh Yeshiva. And he once said the following: that some cardinals came to Yeshiva University. It's like Bar Ilan in New York. And the cardinals, you know, they were shown around the university, and they also wanted to see this Bet HaMikdash, the Beis HaMedrash, you know. They heard this name, Beis HaMedrash, Bet HaMikdash. So they went there, and they came out, and they were so noisy. They said, Rabbi Lam, why are they so angry at each other? They're yelling all the time. So Rabbi Lam said, they're not angry, they're just passionate about the knowledge, you know. They're arguing the point. So they were thinking, and they thought it's a good idea. Yes, Rabbi Lam, could the yeshiva help set up a Beis HaMidrash in the Vatican for us? And then Rabbi Lam thought about it for a while. I said, well, no, our schedule is very busy. Let's talk about it some other time. Because he realized that somewhere we have dogma, you cannot have a Beis HaMidrash. You know, you can't ask questions. Somebody told me that another name for Bet HaMidrash is the house of questioning. Questions and questioning, you know. So the Jews are encouraged to question, good Jews, you know. Someplace, many Jews also have dogmas. They said, that's what my Rebbe said. Yeah. This Rebbe said that. I had a friend, Rabbi Lifshitz, who was a graphologist. He studied with Piaget. His family is from Lita, from the same place as Rabbi Soloveitchik. He said his grandmother went to Cheder until age 12, then she was kicked out, you know. She couldn't be with the boys anymore. I said, in that yeshiva, the rabbi asked you something, asked the bocher something about the Talmud. And the rabbi said, Rabbi Aleph said this, Rabbi Bet said this, Rabbi Gimel said that, and the rabbi said, he shook him, and I said, I know what they said. Tell me what you think, you know. So in that kind of a culture, you learn how to think and how to argue. In fact, I close it with this remark. Rabbi Norman Lamb was a bocher at Yeshiva University, and he was just starting. He was in Rabbi Yosef Soloveitchik's class, Talmud class. And then the rabbi said something, and I said, well, Mr. Lamb, what do you say? And then Norman Lamb said, well, he repeated exactly what the rabbi said. He had a good memory. So the rabbi said to Mr. Lamb, I know what I said. I see that you left your Yetzer Ra in the parking lot. You came to the class with your Yetzer Tov. Next time, leave your Yetzer Tov outside and come with your Yetzer Ra so you could argue with me. So that kind of a culture, you learn how to think. You're forced to think. There's no choice. No, so one can generalize. But I know this is my closing argument for the jury, and the jury will decide what's right and wrong. You know, that's how the machloket is going to be closed. And it was good to see you, Michael.
It's good to see you too.
Michael, I want to mention, you mentioned about the stamp that Germany just issued the latest stamp about German life in Germany. So this was, it was 2 years ago that I was very fortunate. This was in Pelbach, where we had, it was a German-Israel exhibition, and Germany issued 2 stamps, which says Germany-Israel on them. And it was an amazing thing that Germany had. This was at the exhibition, and these were the 2 stamps, with the cancellation of the Brandenburg Gate and the menorah. And yeah, what you've done is, here we have the stamps, but you're actually living it. You are living this coexistence in Germany. And I think it is a phenomenal thing that you're doing and your family are doing, that you're practicing Jews in Düsseldorf. And really, it's amazing. And I just want to say on behalf of myself and Larry that it's been a tremendous honor and a privilege to have you this evening. Your presentation was really absolutely phenomenal. I learned so much, and our viewers will learn, and whoever see this will be so inspired, because it was really very, very special. And you mentioned that you're having the Yotzat, and may it be eternal blessing for it's your father that you're having the Yotzat. May his memory be for eternal blessing, and wishing you a Chaim Arukim, a long life. And let this wonderful presentation that you gave be in his memory.
Amen.
So thank you very much, and we are
Amen.
Okay.
Thank you.
We should meet on good occasions, and looking forward to seeing you when you come to Israel. And we should just meet on smachot and good occasions, and all the very best.
We are already expecting eagerly to have the opportunity to go to Israel again after this long lockdown. But the day will come. I'm sure the day will come, and I will be glad to meet you. I thank both of you. It was a very interesting evening. It was very interesting to know both of you. I mean, Larry, I know a bit, but it was very stimulating. It was a very stimulating talk and discussion, and I'm very thankful to you for this opportunity, and also for your very kind words. You just a little bit exaggerated, but I'll accept that.
Not at all.
This time.
Well, thank you very much, and really, it's been really a great honor and a privilege, and we are extremely grateful to you. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both, and Shavua Tov.
And a Chodesh Tov as well. All the very best.
Chodesh Tov. Yes, that's true.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.